Until now, what we have seen is we have seen how to use a selector to address a particular UI element, identify the UI element, and if you need to type into that particular UI element or you need to log in, you would use a click activity and go ahead and do your process automation using the web browser or the Windows application. So similarly, I'm going to take an example of another web page automation where I'm just going to go ahead and I want to know the city temperature. Okay, so I'm just going to go ahead and enter a city called Bangalore. I'm just going to say I want the temperature for Bangalore. So I'm just going to do a Google search. And finally, I hit an enter and it takes me to the next page. It says this is a temperature today and this is the information that I have for the humidity, precipitation and wind. Okay, so now I'm going to ask my bot to do the same thing as a UiPath process automation. So let me go to my UiPath and see whether I'm able to achieve this as a automation program. So I have my UiPath exercise opened. So I have a process that has been opened. So right now I'm just going to go ahead and you know the drill. I'm going to try and open a browser. So I'm just going to drag in a sequence. So let me drag a sequence, and once the sequence is dragged, I need to first open my google.com. So for that, I'm just going to go ahead and open browser. So now I would give the browser name www.google.com. And I'm going to say I want to type into the Google search and then hit an enter and go ahead and see what is the current temperature of that particular city. So now for me to just, put the city, I'm just going to declare a particular variable called city, and I'm going to say, and I'm going to put it as a default value of string sequence, and I'm going to say Bangalore. So this is my city that I want to find the temperature for. So let me just put it in, let me just store it in a variable called str city, and I'm going to use this inside my program. So now I'm going to go ahead and use a type into action to find my UI element of the Google search text box. So I'll go use an indicate browser and I will indicate the text box in my Google page. And I'm going to go ahead and say, this is where I want to type the city name followed by the temperature. So what am I going to give is my city name is here. So I'm just going to use the city str city followed by a concatenate, a double quotes space, temperature. And I'm going to hit a enter key. So here what I'm going to do is I'm just going to select the key that I need to enter. So you would see a list of keys that are available. I'm just going to go and say my Bangalore space temperature and do an enter. So let me just run this program and see what actually happens. So now it is opening a new instance of the browser. And if you see, my program has executed. So if you see the temperature of the information that it has typed on the Google page is entirely different to what I have given. I have actually asked the program to type Bangalore, but it has missed 3 letters, R, E, and a space in between. So at times this kind of a situation happens, and what is the solution when these kind of situation happens? So whenever we are interacting to your user interface, the user interface being web interface in our case. So whenever we are interacting to a user interface, we basically do either an input action onto the interface, like keying in something or clicking on something. Those are the input actions on that particular interface. Or we're going to get the information of a particular, particular text box or a particular label or something like that. We're going to get that information and we're going to grab that information and use it. So that will be probably the output action that will be taken from the website or the user interface. So similarly, when I say input action, you have 2 actions which we commonly do, which will be type into. Another input action is called click. So whenever we handle these kind of situations where our particular UiPath program is not actually correctly interacting with the web interface or with the Windows application. So whenever these kind of situations arise, now that you saw that, the Bangalore word was not correctly typed, so it was omitting certain letters of the particular string. So whenever this kind of situation comes, we we can use the help of input methods. So what are input methods? Input methods are nothing but these are properties set for the input actions. So here in our case, input actions are type into and a click. So what are input methods here? So every input action will have different properties. Along with the different properties, we have two similar properties that we have. One is the send windows messages and the other is the simulate click. So if you see, these two properties remain common for both the type into and the click input action. So these are called the input methods. So now let's see what are the available input methods in UiPath. So basically, as I said before, whenever your robot is going to interact with your application or with your target application, for that case, be it a web page or an open application, there are certain input actions that it will be using to interact. So these input actions basically will interact with your target application in terms of the compatibility between the two and the capability of how much or what extent it can perform the same activity perfectly. So we have three input actions that is available in UiPath. So these input actions make sure that your robot, indirectly your program, will interact correctly with the target application and give you the best result, so that whatever you're trying to achieve as a process automation is the same, is just a mimic of what you're doing as a human intervention with along with a human. So what do we have as an input method? So we have three input methods that are available. One is default, next is send window messages, and the third one is simulate type or click. All these three methods differ with the type of interaction that they have with the target open application. So what is the difference between all the three? So out of all the three, the default will be the default option that will be enabled for a particular type into or a click action, will be enabled in the property window. Okay. So if you don't want default, then you have to go ahead and choose send window messages is equal to true. Or if you don't require send windows messages or default, go and choose simulate type or click is equal to 2. So that's the option that you do it in the properties of the particular activity that you have, either the type into or the click action. So what is the difference between these three properties? So what happens is, when you're dealing with a default, when you're using the default method, okay, default input method, so what happens is the application will simulate a click or a type action with the help of a hardware driver. While when you're talking about a simulate click or a simulate type, what happens is the particular UI path process automation will actually interact with your applications using the technology that the target application is built on. Then finally comes the send windows messages. So send windows messages, what it will do is, whenever you select the send window messages is equal to true in your property window, it's going to send a specific message directly to the target applications. So all these information or all the activities that is related to the input method is going to happen at the background, so that it improves the integration from by the robot to the target application. So in terms of compatibility and the capability factors that is involved, the integration is going to be more smoother. So that's why we have the input methods that are available. So what do you actually do? So whenever you're using, there is a particular difference between how or where and all you can, on what situations the input methods can be used. So there are certain input methods that you see will work on background execution. Some might not work. So for example, send windows messages and a simulate type might be working for a process automation which executes itself as a background automation. Similarly, you might have the default and the send windows option. Whenever you have default or the send windows message used as or checked in the property window, it might go ahead and support the hotkey. You can go ahead and use hotkeys in your program. So similar to that, there are major differences between all the three. So whenever you are going to select, so what is the best option for you to select? So the best option in terms of speed is going to be simulate type or click, because it's the fastest method. It will just use the technology of the target application and go ahead and interact with the target application. And the second fastest is going to be send windows messages, and the least or the slowest method will be the default method. So this is the idea behind input methods of UiPath. Now let's go back to our program and see where we can fit this input methods, or where we can use these input methods so that our program will work perfectly, correctly interacting to the target application. Okay, so now that I'm back to my program, I'm able to see I have a type into and a click action. These are two input actions that I'm using as a part of my process automation. So if you see, this is the place where my city name was going incorrectly, or was getting typed incorrectly. So what I'm going to do is, there are certain properties that you might go ahead and change, so that you basically test if your robot is able to integrate with your target application seamlessly. So now that we have send windows messages and simulate types both being unchecked by default, so this is the default available option. So when I execute the program with the default available option, it did miss a letter or two while typing the information. So now let me try and work with what other property works better. So how can the application, or how can the robot be seemingly work with the target application? So let me go and introduce a simulate type. So I'm just going to go ahead and say simulate type, where it will be using the technology of the target application. So let me make this to true. So right now I'm setting the simulate type property. So let me see if this particular information is working correctly. So I'm doing a run on the program. So there was again a difference in when I typed my simulate type. It did not perform the hotkey because I gave a hotkey of enter, so it was not able to support the hotkey. Since the input method of simulate type does not support hotkey, it just directly straight away I keyed in the information. But my basic responsibility of whatever issue that we had, that is now resolved. But unfortunately, since we had a hotkey and the simulate type option does not support hotkey, it was not working for me. So now let me go ahead and choose the next option that's available. Let me close the window and I'm going back and choosing send windows messages. So I'm unchecking or making this to the default option, and then I'm going ahead with send windows messages. So let me go and do the same action again. I'm doing a run on the file, and now it works perfectly. So going back to my browser, now you see the entire information has been interacted properly. The robot was able to interact properly with the target application, being the Google web page, and it was able to type in the information properly. So I used the action of send windows messages. I enabled it to true. Thereby, it was properly interacting. It sent a specific message before the execution of that particular activity, and then it was able to integrate properly and interact with the target application. So you can go ahead and uncheck or check these properties, and based on these properties it will interact with the target application, and based on your requirement you can go ahead and play with this particular property. So this is the input method that we have in UiPath. So changing the input method properties will enable your application to, your robot to interact more enhancedly or more seamlessly with your target application. Along with the input messages, if you see, along with your input methods, you see there are a couple of other options also are available. So along with the input methods properties, you also have a couple of other properties that you can use in terms of whenever you're using a type into action. So you can use a click before typing. So this was going to take your mouse cursor position, and it will click on that particular UI element and go ahead and continue with the type into action. Basically, it will click on the center of the UI element. And then you have delay between keys. If you set it to a particular millisecond, it's going to between two letters, or between two keys, it's going to give a delay of that many number of milliseconds. And then you have an empty field option. This is going to have, it's just going to empty that particular field if it's going to be a pre-filled field like a text box or a checkbox or stuff like that.